so much, Bobbi, for joining us today. I wanted to start by sort of talking about how the transgender community has evolved throughout the years.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's been interesting, obviously, and I guess I'm old enough to remember lots of it from the early 70s when it was really very much not acceptable and ridiculed all the way through the 80s and even the 90s. I think in the 2000s we started seeing more acceptance, and I think that was accelerated when Stonewall really embraced transgender people. I think that really was one of the turning points. I think in the latest 2010s, then we saw some real progress for transgender people. You know, we had the Gender Recognition Act. We were seeing some real progress and real positive movements for trans people, and I think they really helped out trans people's lives. I think we've seen a slip back, especially in the last 3 years. I think looking back to the time that I fully came out and started transitioning 3 or 4 years ago, when I started, it was a very open and positive place. And I think the UK especially has lost that over the last 3 years, and they're now, I think as a country, we're very much behind the curve.
What was your life like for you working in finance, and how do you think things have changed for finance professionals now?
Yeah, I mean, I started working in finance in the sort of late 1990s, early 2000s, you know, right in the dot-com boom, and you know, I worked for Enron, and then I worked for lots of financial companies across trade floors and in banking as well. And it's, I think it's changed significantly, not enough. Back in those early 2000s, it was extremely testosterone filled. Yeah, it did make it difficult. I mean, I was never part of the lads club. I think these days, we've moved on a lot, and some of that's due to the financial crisis. Actually, I think really changing completely the face of finance and trading, and I think that had a lot of obviously huge amount of negativity in that industry, but actually had some really positive outcomes because things were, I think, built back in a slightly more empathic way. It's still got such a long way to go. I think we have some amazing female pioneers in banking and trading now. And I think the way is more open, thankfully, for those pioneers to progress. I think there's still that pressure that comes with a high pressure environment to conform, to get on and to perform. Best performance and innovation comes from diversity of thought and the diversity of different ways of looking at data and different decision making. So I think those trading environments and banks that aren't embracing that innovation and performance through diversity are absolutely missing a trick. You know, I mean, a great example actually is one of my friends in Pride Month earlier this year was going around the whole of their organisation handing out rainbow flags and stickers and all of those things, coasters, all that sort of stuff. Went down to the trade floor, and not a single desk on the trade floor would take rainbow flags and all the rest of the stuff, until one desk that had an openly gay person on it took just about every single flag and festooned the whole desk in rainbow flags. And the minute that happened, all of the desks did it, you know. So it's just that, I think we still just have that, we have that pressure, and we just need those brave pioneers to really just stick 2 fingers up at the conventions and the narrowness of thought, and just to show that LGBTQ plus people, and actually, you know, people of every diversity, can be a success in banking and trading.
Definitely. And I think that's a really important example, basically saying that it only can take one person sometimes, one person to stand up and say something, and other people will follow. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Mental health is so important to everyone, and it's something that's spoken about a lot more in society today. What are the mental challenges that our transgender community are facing in today's current climate?
You know, they're huge, and they're you know, everybody has faced in this utterly and completely rubbish and challenging year. Everybody's faced. LGBTQ plus people in general have more day-to-day pressures and day-to-day anxieties, because, you know, we are a minority in society, and there's still a whole load of misinformation and lack of education and prejudice out there against all of the LGBTQ plus community. That's really, really emphasised when you come to the trans community. There's a whole load of hate that's directed at the trans community from some really high profile figures. There's actually some huge pressures that have been put on the trans community from the government with the way that it's absolutely mishandled the Gender Recognition Act reforms. And then compounded on top of that, we've seen trans healthcare, which was in an absolutely parlous state before, with 3-year waiting lists for first appointments for people when it should be 18 weeks. We've seen that healthcare get significantly worse, but as well as that healthcare, we've seen all of the things that trans people use to manage their gender dysphoria, all of the smaller treatments, things like laser hair removal, things like electrolysis, things like meetup groups, all of those things that trans people use as their emotional support, taken away from them. The Trans Rights are Human Rights campaign that we did earlier this year was really one of the, we just wanted to try and get a positive message out to trans people that actually, hundreds of organisations actually support them. So, what you see in the news isn't reality. We have lots of anti-trans people with very, very great media connections and amazing platforms that they can get an anti-trans message out very easily, but they're a very small group of people. Most people in this country absolutely support trans people, and most organisations support trans people, and accept that trans people are allowed to flourish. It's their right to flourish in life and in their career. And they're valued by those organisations, because, coming back to the thing we said before, we get better performance and innovation and decisions made if we have diversity in our organisations, and trans people are an important part of that diversity. And of course, trans people aren't just trans, they have all those different intersectionalities as well. We can have trans people that are differently abled, we can have trans people that are black or brown, or all of those different intersectionalities as well. We can have trans people that are gay or straight or pansexual or bisexual, so there's just like every type of diversity, there's a huge spread, a wonderful spread of different intersectionalities as well.
What should companies really be doing to attract more LGBTQ people and transgender people alone that they're not currently doing?
I think there's a few things that companies can do. There's some foundation parts that they absolutely need to do, and that foundation part is to raise awareness and raise the level of education. So especially around transgender, there's an absolute vacuum of knowledge around what transgender is, that it's just a natural variation that you find in humans and lots of other species. So there's a huge vacuum of knowledge about that. There's a huge vacuum of knowledge about how being transgender actually affects people, and some of the things that we can do to help that. With that foundation comes the next step, which is supporting trans, LGBTQ plus people of all diversities within a company. And I don't mean just create a few guidelines and rules and just put things up saying we're a diverse company. Actively support diverse people in your environment. Actively make sure you are getting diverse people in all levels of your organization. You know, the companies that are hugely successful have diverse people from top to bottom, have support from the board all the way down, and give people time to explore and educate themselves and support each other. You know, that empathic leadership in companies is vital to create that really high performing company that everybody really wants, because that's what creates your bottom line. And the third thing to do is be brave. As an organization, be brave. There's so many organizations that do a good job internally, but they won't raise their head above the parapet publicly and say, we support trans people, we support LGBT people, we support people of all diversities. And what we really need is organisations being braver about what they say publicly about diversity, what they think publicly is acceptable and not acceptable for diverse communities. Because, you know, corporations, especially big, huge corporations, and, you know, trading and banking are typically big, huge global corporations, have really a duty to lead the way. You know, banking and trading, all of those environments are very proud that they're very innovative, fast charging, leading organizations, where they need to lead the way in terms of being absolutely brave and outspoken on diversity and inclusion. And I know, you know, the first thing people come back and say to me is, you know, we're a big organization, you know, we work in those areas of the world where you know, it wouldn't be seen acceptable for us to be making a public stand. And frankly, that excuse just really doesn't hold water. You know, we've seen big global organisations, BP among them actually, that work across the world, and they are perfectly able to make those statements as an organisation and have no effect at all on how they're perceived in different parts of the world. And they're very able to deal with those issues. It's not as big an issue as people think it is.
Definitely, yeah. I think the number 3 really about making a stand and actually saying something seems to be the hardest at the moment. Do you think
Absolutely.
Maybe some organisations are potentially worried about saying the wrong thing?
Yeah, they are, you know, and it's, I think that the issue is multifaceted, really. You know, I mean, yes, some people in the organisations are worried about saying the wrong thing. Lots of that worry, lots of that anxiety about saying the wrong thing comes from a lack of education. So if you sort out the foundation, you know, if you have a comms team in your company that doesn't have that foundation knowledge about diversity and LGBTQ plus people, then they can't speak, have even the base knowledge of what they're talking about. So, you know, then they get hit with all of that, oh no, we can't say this, can't say that, you know, if we say this, we're going to get this reaction or whatever. And we know, you know, social media, Twitter is the worst place on earth to have a discussion, make a statement, or do all the rest of the stuff. But that's where you need to be brave. You know, these are big multinational companies. You know, if they were worried about what half a dozen people said about everything they did, they wouldn't be big multinational companies. They'd be little 2 or 3 person limited companies where they started off. So they need to believe in what they're doing. They need to have the information that backs up that belief, and then they need to go and speak about it. And we've had trans people and LGBT people specifically choose to join BP, and you know, to join the trading arm of BP, or the data engineering team of BP, just because they've seen BP send out those public messages of support for diverse people. You know, we have one amazing data scientist that could have gone to any company in the world, amazing trans man, and he had half a dozen job offers, and he chose BP because of its stance over transgender. So, you know, it's not just the right thing to do, it absolutely makes business sense to do it.
Definitely. If we're looking at the future and we're looking at the next generation, do you think we can see more allies?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, when I started Trans in the City, the goal that we had as Trans in the City was to make ourselves completely unneeded and useless. That's our end goal. You know, the day, I don't think it's going to be in my lifetime, but the day that I wake up and think, well, Trans in the City is a waste of time, isn't it? Will be the day that I will go and buy the biggest bottle of champagne that you have ever seen.